All right. Let's see. Are we on? Yes. Or not? Yes. Mute myself. Edit video. Where do we go? Oh yeah, back out. Live. Monetization on, please. You in control room. Come on. And live chat. Oh wow, Josh is actually back to being first again. All right, into the stream stuff. Did I? All right. So we'll have the band stuff. I actually need to put an eighth one there. That was kind of something that I thought would be intuitive enough for most people, but apparently not. So for next time, I'm gonna have to add a number eight there for racism because apparently that wasn't an intuitive enough bannable offense. And well, for anybody coming in to watch the stream afterwards in the recording, obviously skip ahead like 10 minutes or so to when it actually starts. For anybody waiting around as we wait to see whoever shows up, I'm not a large channel, so like large channels when they stream and they can like play like copyrighted music and stuff, and when they get a copyright notice on the VOD later, they can dispute it, and YouTube will just give it to them and let them use it because YouTube wants to make money off of the stuff from their stream recording too. I'm obviously not in that position, so I can't actually play like waiting around music, but I can give recommendations for you to go listen to yourself. Of which this recommendation this time is for Sadzvid, who is a Ukrainian music artist, and I really like their stuff. Specifically, these ones. Uh, Obviously, you have to look for those. I'm assuming you can't. I'm assuming none of you will probably have a keyboard that lets you type in Cyrillic, but uh, I was just listening to them actually beforehand. So yeah, as long as I silence it fast enough. But yeah, Sadzvitz, their Cassetta album, and it has the different ones down there for you to see and match up to the ones that I recommend at least. Those four are my personal likes from them. All right, so we'll start in a little over 5 minutes, maybe, depending on how many people show up. And I'll alternate back and forth since people apparently need reminders. But like I said, I'm going to have to add number eight down there for racism because that wasn't intuitive enough to the general public. Or I guess technically the most recent one was uh, ethnicism, as it was in the comments under my Sudan Ethiopia video where some Sudanese people came in the comments and were calling Ethiopians subhuman. So there's apparently some actual specific animosity between Sudan and Ethiopia. Yeah, actually, when did we start? Yeah, 5 minutes ago. So we'll start in about 5 minutes. All right, two, three, four. Well, cringe. I'm assuming you're referring that. I'm assuming you're calling those comments cringe, but cringe itself also will get you banned. That is number five. And if you're a tech bro slash crypto cultist, that'll also get you banned as well. All right, make sure. I'd got all that stuff up. That is some fanfic stuff, so X that off for now. What do I need to do? Oh yeah, get up my eternal nemesis. Ooh, Earth.Google versus google.com/Earth. Well, I'm assuming this is the normal one. Yep, because it was at the top. All right, I'm not sure why it's focusing on the Bahamas. Interesting. Usually Google stalks you, and anytime I bring up Google Earth, it will immediately be on whatever country I was last looking stuff up for, which was most recently Algeria. So it should have appeared on Algeria. So I don't know what's doing with the Bahamas. But I mean, you guys have even seen that on stream multiple times now. Like it would when we were like talking about Kazakhstan, and it just went in and immediately appeared on like Kazakhstan, and numerous other times with other specific areas. So I'm not sure if it's just broken right now, their like stalker algorithm, or if it's confused and somehow thinks that I was looking up the Bahamas. But no, there's about 4,000 miles in between the Bahamas and Algeria, so Google Earth is a bit off. About 3 more minutes or so. I'll go ahead and silence my phone, even though no one ever actually uh, texts me other than Josh. And all those weird scam text messages that like just somehow come to your number now. They'll say stuff like the warranty on your 2008 Ford Explorer has expired. And I'm just like, all right, that's interesting, but I've never even owned a vehicle at all, so try again. Uh, Up to four, down to three. Kind of weird. Uh, I thought this would actually be one of the ones where more people would show up. I mean, 15. All right, we'll get that up. Was there anything else from here? Uh, what were those? Oh yeah, no, that was other stuff. Uh, no. Oh, yeah, I have to make a folder for these. So that's a big map progression project for something I may or may not do in the future. It'll ultimately depend on how lazy I get. Right. I don't think there's anything else that I'll be needing at least. Excuse me. Select. Okay, now there we go. Now people are starting to show up. I wonder. Yeah, it's been about 10 minutes or so. So that's interesting. I wonder actually if like the notice or whatever like the thing where you if you go here and like you see it there. I'm wondering if that like only shows up for most people after like 10 minutes because the whole 10 minutes thing and then suddenly everyone shows up seems to be pretty consistent. So I'm wondering if there's actually that's actually like a built-in delay. Was I lazy here? Or did I? Okay, it looks like I did do all the highlighting I wanted to, at least. And I got all that stuff in. Or actually, I am missing one thing I want to have open, at least for later. Out of my face. I want to have the oil price thing up for later, that is. And, wait, we'll leave Google Earth there for a second. All right, since everybody's mostly showing up, we'll basically get started now or so. All right, I'm gonna try to make this not, well, not fast, but just not long. So instead of 3 hours, hopefully like an hour and a half, because I'm kind of tired and my back's killing me. But all right, so the peak oil situation as of present. One other thing we need to go to, obviously, we will need this. Uh, what the? Get off my screen. I don't want your stupid online courses. Okay, all right. So we have that. I don't like their new setup. It's a bit stretched, so it kind of looks weird. And also, they decided to cut it off back there. So we have this thing, the world, the whole world, uh, global oil supply, and then global oil demand, obviously. So at present, we are at about, was it 10? That one, they stopped updating that in January, so they don't have the March numbers, which were, I put them up. Did I put them up here? Thought I did. Or are they down here? Okay, I thought I put them somewhere. If I remember. Ah, okay. Uh, that one was demand. Right. So presently, oil supply or global oil production as of the March data was 101 million barrels a day, and demand was 101.5. And usually, when you look at stuff, you'll see a lot of like smoothed out graphs. However, stuff happens like in between each and every month. So in reality, this is what the actual global supply and similarly the global demand graph will look like. There's a bunch of ups and downs and jagged stuff. And then this anomaly right here, this precipitous drop, is on both the supply and demand graph. That is from COVID because of the demand crash that that COVID caused during the first half through the parts of the third quarter of 2020. And obviously, you know, the oil producers of the world weren't going to keep pumping 100 and something million barrels a day if only about 80 was being consumed for a few months because there wouldn't be anywhere to put it. And so a lot of stuff went offline for a few months, and then everything started getting dialed back up as demand recovered. And demand has mostly now recovered back up to right around where it was. And we're at the present latest month's setup, which is 101 supply and 101.5 demand. And for for the upcoming situation, at least for the upcoming production situation, I laid out a rough setup in the free poor person's version of Excel, which is Google Docs. And so you have various angles. This is, I forgot to label these. So this is 2023 and yeah, 24, and then you can figure it out for yourself from there. So like this is over the course of this year, we have the 500,000 barrel per day further Russian production drawdown to conceal the downturn that their production is going to undergo, since the Western oil industries that they would like to pretend were not responsible for recovering their post-Soviet oil production are now gone. Their production is now going to drop down. And in terms of, I don't think it's going to go all the way down because it's going to get stopped before then. But in terms of how far it could go, do I still have that graph? I might not. Oh, no. Uh, Load, please. Hello? Hello? Oh, there it is. So when the USSR fell and a lot of their like internal revenue and stuff abruptly collapsed. Obviously, everything was kind of state run, so they weren't able to upkeep a lot of stuff, and also a lot of like engineers and like high level job people once the borders were open kind of left Russia and other USSR countries, and so the industry was left in shambles, and it had a massive collapse. Primarily, the more difficult engineering required stuff in the Arctic and stuff with permafrost. And so it fell down to a floor of about whatever regular conventional production was remaining, which at the time was about 6 million. But on the declination slope, by now would probably be around 4 million. However, I don't think they're going to precipitously drop all the way to that, because this isn't going to last forever. And then once things resettle in the second half of this decade, most likely the outside industries are then going to be allowed back in, and eventually to not just Russia, but both chunks of Russia, both halves that it's going to split into. But for the purpose of simplicity, I just am just listing everything as just Rus. So have the further few years into the future, about 500,000 drop for each year. I'm gonna keep it as that and not assume a full post USSR collapse in which it was about 1 million barrels per day each year of a drop. And then for the rest of this year, the U.S. at least, and again, this isn't from this moment. This is from the start of the year to the end. The U.S. is going to go up by about 800,000. So from 12 million up to 12.8. Canada is going up by another 200,000 over the course of the year. Brazil by about 500,000. Angola dropping by a further 100,000 or so. China's going to be staying flat relatively until probably next year. They're going to resume a decline. And then you have some rough averaged out increases for Argentina, which is about 50K a year. Azerbaijan is going to jump up by about 50K over the course of this year and then resume their decline from that, which has been about 50K per year. And me putting these numbers is not me literally saying each and every one of these is going to be exactly 50K per year, or exactly like say 300 increase or decrease. Green is increase, red is decrease, or orange rather. This is just me again being lazy and self-generous, and thus rounding to the nearest 50. And then for some of these, because I didn't want to deal with anything other than 50s, as I already implied, I threw a bunch of countries together in different brackets so that I can say, like, this is minus 50 per year from these three: Ecuador, Colombia, and Gabon. Their collective declines together, adding up to roughly 50,000 barrels per day of lost production per year. And then some others down here that I threw together, different groupings. And larger producers obviously get to be by themselves, or those that are like Guyana and Senegal, although Guyana is going to be a large producer, but ones that are about to spring to life get to be by themselves. And then down here, we total them up. And so, yeah, there's where I put supply. So then we total them up. So about 1.9 million barrels per day of gain this year versus about 800,000 barrels per day of loss. And you get a net increase of about 1.1 million barrels per day of production from 101. And that gets you, obviously, about 102.1 million barrels per day of production at the end of the year. So that's the general setup that I did for this. And I didn't go too far into the future because once you go too far, then you're getting into unpredictable stuff. But I did this for the next onset of coming years. And you can see slowly as you start going across that you do not actually peak completely, or at least not. It doesn't seem so once you keep going. In 2025 or 2026, you do sort of stop at 103, and then you start bouncing around, and you end up uh, when you go down here. This is what the general outlook is, at least using the numbers that I put in, and we'll talk about the ones that I haven't in a minute. But using the numbers that I have put in for the general trends that we know relatively for sure are going to happen, you get this coming up to about 2026 or so at 103. And again, those numbers can change, but that's the utmost highest point, or so it seems like. And then it kind of just has a wobbly staving off until you go into the early 2030s. And then as you start passing into the 2030s, is where global production starts to take its downward turn. So expectation is still roughly what what I reworked my math to into being my relative call since 2020, because before that it was more like mid 2020s slash the later part of the early 2020s. However, then the COVID years, primarily 2020 and the first half or so of 2021, kind of interrupted everything and forced a reworking of that, because that caused a bit of a delay or disruption to now the mid 2020s or later 2020s. And this is a bit of a change from my previous outlook stuff, by a stretching of a year or two for the sort of the gradual plateau portion. Whereas previously, instead of like say the later early 2020s, the downward curve I previously had starting at around like 2030 itself or so. But now, at least as of how things are for the moment, it looks like it's going to be stretched just a bit. So it's not the definitive pointy peak that has initially usually been shown or expected by a lot of people. It's going to be a sort of broken, jaggedy plateau of sorts for about a decade or so. I should probably check. Uh, as captions. I have no idea about that. I don't know how the caption stuff works. Some setting. Uh, okay, I'll check. Okay, can I scroll down? Is there anything else? Uh, all right. So you're seeing what I'm seeing, and that noise, if you hear that noise, is me trying to click, tap, tap, tap. I can't turn it on, apparently, so I apologize for that. Is it analytics? Okay, analytics is the regular page. So apparently uh, I can't actually turn that on. But so that's the setup there, and the actual numbers, at least for again the stuff that I relatively know is going to happen, come out to this year 101, end of the year 102.1, then to 102.7, 103, then down to 102.6, back up a tiny bit to 102.7, down to 102.6 again, down to 102.4, back up to 102.6, and where's it? 102.7, and then that is 20. This is 2020, 2030, or no, this should be 2031 or 2032, where Saudi Arabia, if they have not been lowering their production ahead of time to conceal it, like I expect they will, this would be when their 10 million barrel per day plateau would start to decline on its own if they were still holding it up until that point. So then I switched Ghana's slot out for Saudi Arabia because Ghana will be down to a negligible point by then. And so then you get Saudi Arabia dropping by about 200K per year. And so you go back down to 102.6, then down to 102.2, 101.8, and from there you see it actually declining. Now, outside of that, so again, this is the relative bumpy plateau arch that it's looking like, with the highest point probably around like 2025 or 2026 at around 103 million. The previous high was about 102.5, and that was obviously before COVID, before 2020 happens. And obviously, the highest point of demand so far, global demand was also pre 2020, and that was 102.2, if I remember correctly. So that uh, it was in that particular month's average, at least, it was a 300,000 barrel per day oversupply. So after the regular stuff that's going to happen, we have the issue of wild cards. Uh, people or places like, oh, we're right here. Libya. Libya produces about 1.2 million barrels per day at the moment. I listed as 1.2, and Libya is a wild card because they have three times now, I believe it might be four, since the Libya situation started in 2011, gone completely offline whenever the civil war flares up into full swing. And so they, at this particular moment, are producing 1.2 million barrels per day right now. However, that could drop off the face of the earth in an instant with no warning. And there is potentially a decent chance of that happening again soon this year, actually, because later this year they are going to try to have an election again. And the thing is, the last time they tried to have an election, or the last two times, the one of Gaddafi's former generals now has, kind of declared himself the supreme ultimate chancellor, commander, field marshal, basically giving himself the same title that Gaddafi gave himself. And he's over there in Benghazi, and every time they hold elections and he doesn't win them, he just attacks and restarts the civil war, and their production drops offline. So that can happen at any moment. At the because that's also happened on non-election years. He has also just started everything back up again, like just for the fun of it. But the every time they hold elections, then it's guaranteed because he doesn't win the election and he doesn't like the fact that he doesn't win, so then he attacks. So Libya can drop off the face of the earth at a moment's notice. Also, Iran is presently holding under their semi less sanctioned levels of about 2.5 million barrels per day, and they are capable of holding a 4 million barrel per day plateau. And their extended time frame of not producing completely has stretched out the time that they could hold that plateau for further, because for massive producers like the Persian Gulf nations who have like gargantuan amounts, the the additionally bought time of that they get from offset from not producing fully is it substantially outweighs the degradation, the pressure degradation that a field experiences when it's not producing, just because of the sheer size and scale of the fields and reserves that they're working with. So normally, most countries would experience like decent degradation levels. However, once you get to like their level and the sheer scale of things that they're dealing with, then the time that they spend not producing or producing under decently under their regular plateau amounts, it is substantial enough to outweigh the pressure degradation and stretch their plateau capability out further. So Iran, roughly, according to my math, initially before they went under sanctions in the later 2010s, would have been able to hold their plateau until I think 2041 or 2042. Now it's been stretched out to where they can probably hold it until, again, if they were to turn everything back on right this instant, they could probably hold until like 2045. But they're presently producing 2.5, and again, they're a wild card. Anything could happen at any given moment. We could abruptly remove all the sanctions from them and they could dial back up to 4 million, thus adding 1.5 million barrels per day of supply to the world. Or they could break into unrest again and all of their oil workers could walk off the job like they did back in November, when everything was fully heated up, and thus collapse their production. And since you remember, to appease the protesters and stop the uprising, Tehran announced that they were going to abolish the morality police and they weren't going to enforce all the hijab stuff anymore. Well, for those of you who like pay attention to global news frequently, you've probably already seen in recent weeks they completely went back on that decision and said, no, they're actually going to enforce it even harder. So, who could have seen that coming? So now the people are angry again, and they're probably they're probably going to start stuff up again, and so that could take part of Iran offline. And also, when the inevitable war between Turkey and Iran breaks out, that's probably also going to take quite a bit of stuff offline. But time frame for that is not completely predictable, although it might come sooner than I initially expected, because Iran and Azerbaijan have already been starting to flare up a bit. although it still kind of feels a bit too early for that. Then the others, uh, yeah, Kuwait and the UAE. Kuwait is still down by about 300,000 from their regular plateau of 3 million, and the UAE is down by about 900,000 barrels per day from their regular plateau, or the one they want to hold, of about 4 million. And they are so because Saudi Arabia has ordered further production cuts because they want to basically they were up just over 11, and that was because they had ordered a round the table OPEC production increase. And as I've said, their ceiling is now down to roughly probably 11.6 or 11.7. And they didn't want to risk exposing their ceiling since they've walked back their prior admission that, so back in the 90s, the crown prince at the time of Saudi Arabia declared that their maximum ceiling was about 15 million barrels per day, and Saudi Aramco kind of backed them up on that. And in the early 2010s, they admitted, Saudi Aramco, rather, not the Saudi royalty, not the Saudi government, that their ceiling was probably only around 12 and a half by then. And then in the later 2010s, pretty close to 2020, they admitted once more that their ceiling was probably down to 12. However, recently, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the new one, walked back those statements and declared that no, Saudi Arabia's ceiling is still 15 million and it will always be 15 million. So, according to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's oil is infinite. And I mean, he's the Crown Prince, so who am I to argue with his statement? But anyways, here in the real world, their ceiling is now probably down to around 11.6 or 11.7, and they wanted to, recoil their production back down to their regular plateau, but they didn't, want to do that all by themselves because then that would be a bit suspicious. It would kind of look like they were trying to conceal a lower ceiling. So they ordered all of OPEC to reduce their production in a production cut effort, and that has Kuwait still not up at 3 again and back down to 2.7. And the UAE is holding at 3.1 instead of going all the way back up to 4 like they wanted to. So those two could disobey at any moment, or Saudi Arabia could announce further cuts and drag them along with them at any moment. Uh, when you get to some of the others and my cursor's frozen, I will plug in a physical mouse, Google Earth, if you don't unfreeze my cursor. You want me to? All right, I'll do it. Oh, no? Okay, there we go. And Iraq. Iraq is one of the big ones in terms of wild cards. Iraq is really, uh, I kind of heavily suspect Iraq is going to leave because OPEC at this point has essentially just become Saudi Arabia in terms of collective decision making. There isn't any anymore. It's just whatever Saudi Arabia wants, and it's become pretty obvious that Saudi Arabia is just doing whatever to like try to conceal their own stuff, and they are holding Iraq back with their constant decisions in this regard. You'll see here, get up to the eyes, Iraq, trade, crude oil production. So Iraq was really starting up, and as soon as they were going up like that, Saudi Arabia announced production cuts and kept them going, forced Iraq to stay there until the further cuts in the wake of the COVID demand crash and then coming back up. And Iraq was back up to 4.7. They were heading to 5 again. And then Saudi Arabia announced the production cuts again to conceal their own ceiling, like I said, and are once again holding Iraq back from doing what Iraq actually wants to do. So I highly suspect, possibly, actually, probably in this decade, there's a good chance Iraq is going to leave because they've already signaled that they're getting sick and tired of Saudi Arabia constantly screwing them over, and so they're probably going to leave. And that's not an unheard of thing for OPEC. Qatar, they are the peninsula nation, used to be a member, and they left because they were getting sick of it. And Ecuador also left. Indonesia left as well, but they were actually kind of forced out because they are no longer an exporter. They haven't been for quite a while. So it's not like an unheard of thing for a country to leave OPEC. But I mean, the the Persian Gulf members in particular have been in from the very beginning, back in the 50s or 60s or whatever. So Iraq leaving would be like the biggest deal so far out of anyone who's left. But I really do feel that is probably coming because they are really getting tired of this holdback on Saudi Arabia's part. Check feed. If I can. Exclamation point. Uh, Saudi government failure, that will depend on a lot of things. They're not at the top of my list for government failures. I mean, the within the Middle East, at least, the Iran has the government in Tehran has effectively sealed its fate at this point. The citizenry is inevitably going to overthrow that. Assad's dead. As soon the moment everything shatters for Russia and their a whole self implosion starts, and they're no longer propping and they're no longer propping him up. Assad is done. As for uh, as for Saudi Arabia, that will depend on if they continue, if the government continues down this whole insane nonsense of constantly throwing trillions around on these vanity projects that never even get started anyways, while keeping roughly half of their population in despondent poverty, then they will probably start pushing things that way. And also, once they kind of deplete their groundwater that they've been relying on, they like to pretend that desalination supplies will be perfectly fine for them. However, that's not actually the reality. They do get way more water from desalination than a lot of other countries, but they also rely on pumping water out from a ancient desert aquifer, which, unlike other countries like say China or India, who are depleting aquifers way faster than they refill during rainy seasons, Saudi Arabia kind of their aquifer doesn't refill, because it's Saudi Arabia. So they're in an interesting squeeze with that regard, but we'll see how that all comes about. I mean, maybe they'll throw their trillions at ordering import tankers, like water tankers, because they could certainly afford it. But that'll remain to be seen. And Nigeria is now entering the phase of looking like they're heading into the danger zone in terms of their stability. Ethiopia, like I said in that one video already, has effectively already sealed its fate when it decided to go full brutalist suppression and million-person starvation massacre on Tigray for daring to revolt. So that fate has been sealed already. Basically, once you choose once you choose to do that as your response, you've effectively condemned yourself already. but that is still the immediate default response that almost any government goes to, anyways. Were there any others? Oh, and speaking of Nigeria, Nigeria is also on the sort of wild card list, not of not being in the general supply slash decline uh, list out that I give each year because Nigeria is not entirely predictable. And also, their production has been constantly getting eaten away at by infrastructure degradation, underfunding, lack of investment because of constant money funneling and government corruption, and also all the oil pipeline theft and black market stuff. So while they could be pumping about 2 million barrels per day like they used to, they are now down to less than 1.3 as of this month. And unless things change, they are going to keep going down and lose about 100,000 barrels per day of production each year from further infrastructure degradation and further black market operations. So, and in terms of like in terms of like that oil, the black market, in terms of the oil black market, it's not going out to like the entire market at large. That is the black market, and that was one of my water bottles falling over. The black market stuff is actually just feeding sort of a lot of Nigeria and a few surrounding states' own supply needs, as it's not like there's black market oil tankers or anything. It's groups of people. It's basically criminal gangs go up to the pipelines. They punch holes in them, set up siphoning like smaller siphoning pipelines to divert stuff, and they have uh, bigger than Uncle Billy Bob's backyard refinery, but smaller than an actual refinery. They have something in between uh, for their black market refineries, but they do have their do-it-yourself refineries, and they refine fuel and sell it basically locally for, we'll say, like half the price that Nigerians would otherwise pay at the gas pump for it. And, no one's going to refuse that deal, at least once they have a guarantee that the black market fuel works and it's not just like uh, water with some black food dye squirted into it. And so that's how that situation's going, and that's kind of why Nigeria's oil demand growth seems to have stopped after like climbing so quickly. It seems to have gradually stopped mysteriously around 600,000 barrels per day or so. That is actually because additional hundreds of thousands of barrels per day are being fulfilled within the country by the black market fuel extraction stuff. And that missed the gap between 1.3 and 2 million barrels per day for them. That's not all black market stuff. The black market extraction from the pipelines varies from 200 to 400,000 barrels per day on any given month. The rest of it is actual like loss, production loss from inability to use the like field infrastructure because so little, so little. Ugh, my brain's starting to malfunction. So little maintenance and upkeep funding is actually like spent properly because so much of it gets diverted into politicians' bank accounts. Just like you, that should sound familiar to you because that's what happens with the electricity grid money down in South Africa. So similar story. But so Nigeria is uh, not on the list of predictables. It's on the wild card list and presently is at about 1.3 million barrels per day. And if nothing changes, will continue declining actually from further loss of stuff. But they could also, abruptly fix everything and stop the black market and go back up to 2 million barrels per day. So, they could go either way, like several of the others. So they're unpredictable as well. And then we have Venezuela, which I personally feel is kind of predictable because we kind of know what's coming. but not entirely. So Venezuela is lagging around at about 700,000 barrels per day when they could be producing 3 million barrels per day. And basically, every time they kick Chevron out, they collapse back down by a few 100,000 barrels per day. Then they invite Chevron back in. Chevron restores their production back up to like 800 or 900,000. And then their brain stops working. So they kick Chevron out again. Their production collapses back down again. And they've been repeating this pattern for the last 5 years or so. And they don't seem to actually see what the pattern is. The government in Caracas, I mean, doesn't seem to actually understand the pattern that's going on here. And so they will constantly be repeating that off and on, potentially with a eventual regain of an additional 2.3 million back up to 3 million barrels per day of production, maybe. However, I doubt that's going to happen until after a major government switch, which would likely be the result of the inevitable war between us, the US, and Venezuela. There would not really be a war per se, more of a mass cruise missile bombardment and sort of eventual breakdown. The flare up for that war, of which would be Venezuela actually doing something to Guyana or attempting to. Since you see that dotted line, that is the western 2/3 of the country of Guyana. Venezuela claims belongs to Venezuela, and Maduro has been starting to get a bit handsy, a bit touchy. So the the likelihood that he's gonna try something is becoming very real because that's also what dictators do when they start getting desperate and when nothing's really going their way. So he's probably going to try something eventually, and that's going to lead us into it. And then he slash the continuation of the Chavez regime basically will then actually fall at that point. And once things restabilize in Venezuela, then Venezuela's oil production will likely get brought back up to its regular potential. But entire that's not entirely guaranteed. Like with everything else, I could be wrong, and Venezuela could just continue lagging around in this meager 700,000 barrel per day mire for I don't know, for indefinitely into the future, for all I know. But those are the wild cards in general. So this, without any of these going in either direction that they could go, this will otherwise be the general way that the global production curve is going to go over the next 15, or rather 12 years or so, heading up into after about 2026 or so, heading into a sort of bumpy plateau state. And then once we pass the early 2030s, curving over into the beginning of an actual decline. And then from there, to work with the effects of that, we go into some demand stuff. But I should actually look at chat again. Oh, actually, it doesn't look like much has been happening. Uh, Depends on your definition of large for the Somalia question. Uh, Not like enormous, but I do have them start to. Yeah, okay, Somalia. So yeah, exploration is starting offshore of Somalia this year, which isn't going to yield too much, at least not at first, because like I said, most of Somalia's oil is going to be onshore. However, the situation needs to stabilize completely first before the industry is willing to work there, and it has stabilized by more than half, actually. Al Shabaab, which is the primary militant group there that has made things horrific, has actually been decimated by repeated drone strikes between us, the US, Turkey, and Somali drone pilots that us and Turkey have trained, as we are giving them some Predator drones, and Turkey's giving them some Bayraktars, because the U.S., have primarily been using Reapers now, but those are technically getting aged out, and the Predators were before the Reapers, so they're like old, and we don't want to just like boneyard them, so we figure we'll start giving them to uh, we'll start giving them out. And as for us ourselves, is us here we go. Us ourselves are moving on to, I forgot what the designation is, like the RQ-62 or something, but we're moving on to the Fury. Not Fury as in anger, but Fury as in the mythological bird creature that drags that would like drag souls to the underworld. So we're moving on to the Fury, and obviously there's no actual images of it yet. This is just rendition, but I call this Happy Sharks because I mean, look at them. That's the smile, and there's the shark nose. They literally look like happy sharks. So this is what's coming to Drone Strike You sometime soon. Brought to you by DARPA and Raytheon and General Dynamics. Uh, do oh yeah, yeah. Somalia. So Somalia would likely start coming online very late 2020s, and so I put them in there as coming on with the usual like boost amounts, sometimes smaller. And for the moment, I basically put them at a safe like plus 100 per year on their climb up. And I would expect them to likely get up to like 1.5 million barrels per day. It's at some point, but that would probably be closer to like 2040. Right? And so that's the actual supply stuff and the wild cards. However, then we also have to go into the demand aspect of things. Else, uh, okay, doesn't seem so, or at least not stuff that's directly a question or anything. So 101.5 is the current oil demand level as of last month's data. And just to give a quick uh, look of the setup, based on, because again, every demand level slash every supply level fluctuates from month to month or even from week to week or day to day. But for the most recent monthly data, for example, Poland was about 100,000 barrels per day below their modern average, although their demand levels are still growing. And Turkey is about 200,000 barrels per day below. The U.S. about 1 million below average. So did those have those up in total? 2.5 total below average, 1.5 above, and so you end up with otherwise, if everyone were at their regular averages, both up and down, currently at this moment, global oil demand would be about 103 million barrels per day. And so, looking into likely further growth in demand or decline, because some countries are declining for various reasons. And this is not growth indefinitely. This is growth over the time frame that we are looking at. So about a dozen years or so, a dozen to 15 years. Poland will likely level off at around 1 million barrels per day of average demand, so about 200,000 more from where they are now. Turkey will probably climb up to about 1.5 million by close to 2030 before, and I stop them there just because that's about when they're likely going to be starting their their further Ottoman restoration nonsense. And so that's likely going to have consequences. So we'll say they're going to go up by about another 300,000, and then after that is not entirely predictable. South Korea and Japan, both over that time frame, are likely going to decline actually by about 200,000 barrels per day each. China is probably going to grow in average by at least another 2 million barrels per day quickly. However, I have to stop them there because 2025 to 2027 is like the latest time frame at which they're going to go for Taiwan. So when that happens, there's going to be economic consequences. So we'll at least say plus 2 million more. Mexico, probably about 300,000 barrels per day more. Thailand has basically, or at least in terms of their where they were before 2020, had basically kind of leveled off, and their population is about to start contracting, so they wouldn't be going too much further. The US has kind of leveled off, and France was pretty stable, uh, and they're pretty much sticking around 1.7. Italy, over that time frame, because of continuing contraction and population aging, is likely going to drop by about 100,000 in demand. Taiwan would likely remain flat as they've been doing. However, there's also going to be probably a substantial drop during the whole incident from them. The UAE is actually going to drop in demand by about 200,000 barrels per day as they shut down the remaining smaller bits of oil fired power generation as they turn on the remaining two nuclear reactors in their nuclear plant. Iraq, over the coming time period we're discussing, will probably get up to averaging a million barrels per day of demand. Indonesia, based on their previous patterns, will likely grow by another 500,000, getting up towards three or so. India will grow by probably about a million or so, but potentially more. Algeria by about 100,000. South Africa is going to continue their downward economic spiral and contraction and will probably shut off another 100,000 barrels per day of demand. For example, if you didn't know already, they had gotten up to averaging between 600,000 and 650,000 before their more gradual economic downward spiral started in the 2010s, and they have since dropped down to about 500,000 barrels per day of consumption. However, these last 2 years or so, and especially over the past year with their whole power grid collapse stuff, they have gone down into a much further spiral. Egypt will probably grow up to about a million barrels per day. They're economically stalling out. However, just raw numbers will still carry their consumption upwards. Post war, when things will relatively resettle in Ukraine, they will jump back up to about 300,000 barrels per day of consumption. Kazakhstan will continue growing from about 400,000 up to about 500, where they'll probably level off. Vietnam has not been growing as fast as previously anymore, so they will probably only jump up by about 200,000. The Philippines up by another 100,000. And then you have some of the others. Pakistan, as they continue falling apart internally, will probably drop by another 100,000. All of the Balkans collectively add up to probably a decline of about 100,000 because of major population contractions. Spain down by about 100,000, similar to Italy. Russia, as everything falls apart internally, especially after the Grand War failure, they've already dropped down from the 3.8 million barrels per day that they had recovered to over the course of 25 years. They've already declined down now to 2.8, and 2.5 is about what they dropped to post USSR collapse. So I wouldn't exactly see them dropping farther than that, at least initially. But I mean, they could, but they'll at least drop by another 300,000 of demand. Morocco will probably go up by another 100,000 because they're going up pretty fast. And Saudi Arabia actually will likely be dropping by 500,000 barrels per day in average demand. because they are continuing their switch over from oil-fired power generation to natural gas-fired power generation, whereas previously it was like 70-30 for oil gas. Now it's 30-70, 30% from oil, 70% from gas. And if you're wondering, well, did they really just like flare all of their gas in the past? Yeah, actually, that is literally what they did. And that's actually what Iraq still does to this day. They're still using oil-fired power generation, some natural gas-fired power generation, and importing electricity from Iran because they just never built the stuff to actually harvest the gas that accompanies their oil. So for the most part, they've been flaring it a lot, and Saudi Arabia used to flare it in huge amounts. However, now they're actually using it because they've realized with their electricity demand constantly going higher, if they were going to keep using oil-fired power generation, they're they would inevitably like pass the point of consuming half of their own production and then 60% and 70% and so on. So they really didn't want that, especially with the end of their plateau eventually coming. So they finally decided to actually switch over to natural gas, which they've been working on for the last 15 years, and over the next dozen years or so that we're dealing with in this projection, they will likely complete that effort, and so they'll drop by another 500,000. And so likely over this time frame, you get 5.7 increase, 1.9 decrease, and average them out to around 106.8 million barrels per day as the highest demand point that we will likely see over this coming time period. And with again, this 103 is the highest production point on the projected graph. And so over the highest point 3, that's over it by about 4 million barrels per day of overshoot. And compare this to the first oil peak back in the late 2000s, where we had an extended time period, about 2 years, where oil demand was above oil production by about 2 million barrels per day, and storage inventories got eaten away really far down. And that resulted very quickly in a doubling of price from the average from 40 up to about 80. And then in that, eventually, as things got really bad, the inventories were getting really critically low. You saw that $147 mega price lunge. So, uh, if uh, if each 2 million barrels per day, we'll say, seems to equate to a factor increase of the price, then a 4 million barrel per day potentially sustained overshoot eventually in the coming years would then thus be a tripling of price and price average. So here I'll show you what I mean. Previously average was like closer to 40, and then started getting up to and hanging out around 80 or so, and then went for the mega lunge. And then situation was still strained and collapsed as production finally started climbing again. And as we come in closer, minus all the uh, outside of the chaos and Ukraine invasion stuff, average had resettled to around 60 or so. So, tripling of that would obviously, instead of back in the late 2000s, where it went up from averaging around 40 to averaging around 80 for a time, it would go from averaging around 60 up to averaging around 180. And instead of a 147 lunge, we would have a 200 plus who knows lunge. This particular portion is likely going to happen this decade, obviously in the later part. And the exact numbers, obviously, I can't really give you. And for all I know, it might not be just a factor for factor. So two is a one increase or a doubling. Four is a uh, is two additions to that, so a tripling. for all I know, it might end up being more wild than that, and instead of a tripling, it's like a quadrupling or something. But this seems to be generally how it went. So this is what's likely to be seen. But then again, also, we have no idea how the other stuff might go with all the unpredictable boys here. So, like, things could be worse if Libya happens to drop off the face of the earth and return to full blown civil war at any given time or at a really inopportune time. Or it could be better if, say, I don't know, Nigeria actually gets its act together and like restores itself back up to its 2 million barrel per day plateau. Or if Iraq especially would be like the biggest one if Iraq finally leaves OPEC sometime this decade and just starts pursuing their maximum production capability. That would be like the big killer. That would really balance everything out and would make this climb up a bit more towards up around like 105, which would make things easier and thus would make the gap here a 2 million barrel per day gap instead of a 4 million barrel per day gap, which would then, uh, like, say, if we have that, we would then see a price increase to from 60 to about 120 for an average, and potentially a lunge only up to around 200, but still everything would remain to be seen because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, who might explode, who might get struck with by an asteroid. What was this? Oh, yeah. And then there's this crudely drawn thing that I forgot to show at the beginning. So this is like we're right here at this red circle. There's the big COVID drop. There's the first oil peak in the late 2000s. So this is more or less like how things are relatively going to look. So you see here, we climb up a bit higher, have the bumpy plateau bit, and then start trending down. And you saw this bit, which is where it starts going in the early to mid 2030s. Then it inevitably goes really steep, but then uh, you're gonna have areas like this where it, like, kind of stops a bit bumpily and then drops again. Basically, as massive, enormous Burj Khalifa height price spikes drive massive further like supply investments and stuff. So there was never going to be a literal like smooth downward turn. It's going to be a bit of a steppy, undulaty thing like this. Uh, okay. I mean, if you want me to, sure. Uh, uh, Faster to cannibalize. Uh, what do you mean by cannibalize society? You miss. Uh, you do you mean me? What do you mean for the? Or do you mean like you weren't online for the last 2 weeks? Because I mean, I've been here the whole time. I haven't been streaming twice a week like I was like the last month, but I actually just started for the most part doing actually like doing relatively frequent videos again. Yeah, you can see those larger gaps there. I was a bit out of it and starting to get lazy. Although I'm slipping a bit with this schedule here. Uh, it won't really. That's an electrical power source. Oil is oil is a not re- oil is not really used for electricity generation anymore, except for a few countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE a little bit, and Iraq. There are there's a few others I think that use some, but they don't make up like nearly as much as those three. Oils predominantly, obviously, liquid fuel. Liquid fuel makes up like 60 to 70% of its consumption. For let me think. So we're at about 100 million now, and it's about 26 million was the new record set this year for gasoline demand globally. Uh, 30 million, or no, 29 million for diesel. So that's 55. We've recovered up to about 6 million barrels per day of jet fuel demand. So that's 61. And roughly 6 million barrels per day of marine fuel. So that's 67. So yeah, so 67 out of 101.5, basically 67%. The rest is used to make material stuff like plastics, petrochemicals, cleaning things, medications, pavement for roads, tar for other things, waterproofing like roofs and buildings, and oh, what am I forgetting? I'm forgetting something. Something I normally didn't think of. Uh, Petrol gas. Uh, yeah, petrol gas. It's like LPG is the proper term. That's used. It's used as a heating fuel or also a cooking fuel. Usually, it's what's used for buildings in like more remote areas where no one really wanted to pay to run like natural gas pipelines to, or if there is no like regional natural gas supply, then they'll usually use LPG. And am I thinking of um? Well, there's some other stuff. There's still gases, which are parts of the oil that sort of gasify in the refining process. And I think they're about 2 million barrels per day out of the total now, and they get consumed by the refinery itself, so that it is effectively self-powering. Because the way refineries work is you heat up the oil as it's passing through the pipeline system, and that will cause the different components to start rising up the tower, where they then get siphoned off at different levels as they separate. And the heating in refineries is usually done by burning still gas, which is one of the things that comes out of the oil that's being refined. So that, in large part, at least the refinery towers, the tower portion, is self-powered from the still gas that's coming out of the oil. And that's most of the components. In terms of like the plastics and petrochemicals and stuff, and all the individual material things that get synthesized out of oil, that's a really, really long, lengthy list that composes almost everything around you in some form. So I don't want to go down that one; that would take forever. But geothermal is not really going to do anything to that or any real electrical change. If you're referring to like EVs with that angle, like reducing fuel demand by a big EV switch or something, then the electricity supply isn't the thing that like constrains EVs. What constrains or what will constrain EVs is the lack of actual materials for the EVs, as there's not enough lithium, at least to make as many EVs as would be needed, and to also have all the other things that we need lithium for. And they're more so than lithium, the big constrainer is nickel. There is absolutely nowhere near enough nickel for a massive like electric vehicle conversion because their batteries require so much nickel, and we kind of need nickel for other critical things like steel, which we use to build stuff and hold stuff together, and coat things to resist saltwater corrosion, like chips and any infrastructure and outer surfaces that are like near the ocean kind of require a lot of nickel because nickel is really good at resisting salt water. Nickel's the real big constrainer there. Copper is also going to cause an issue, but copper is not because of an actual like physical not enough in total. Copper is going to be running into availability, like how fast we can get it limits, because of Peru kind of starting to crack a bit inside politically, and they're one of the big suppliers, so that's going to be an issue. And then Chile is going real heavy-handed environmentalist route, and is not really like and is starting to turn very mine unfriendly. They're being the opposite of what Canada is, whereas Canada is like vocally green, quote unquote. The green government in Canada still keeps giving the thumbs up, okay, still keeps signing off on all the new oil and mining projects, whereas in Chile, their newly green government is actually like trying to not allow any of the new stuff or any expansions of mining operations. And Chile is the mega copper supplier of the world, and also one of the larger lithium suppliers too. So they're going to be causing an issue from that angle, which is factors in, but it's not the primary thing. The primary constrainer for the EVs is nickel, and the fact that so many companies have their batteries and EVs built in China, which is going to really bite when the invasion starts in the next few years, whichever year they decide to do it. So the whole EV angle isn't isn't going to actually like help society. All it's going to do is help Elon Musk make more money because a bunch of tech bros uh, because a bunch of tech bros are hyped up about it and all rush to inflate Tesla's value, even though the actual value in total of stuff that Tesla makes and sells does not match their market valuation at all, compared to like the other automakers. But tech bros are going to tech bro. So I'm assuming I'm assuming that's what you meant. That's what you meant for will geothermal affect this? If not, then I'm sorry that I'm completely off. Having some water problems might not. In specific regions, yes. In Atacama and Antofagasta regions, there's a definitive water issue. Not in the south though. Continue. You mean to continue trying to slow it down, or to continue mining, like just in general. What I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. Prognosis for the Ukraine war. Okay, again, here we go. I don't know how many times I've done this, but so as how it's going to go, basically. So Russia had to fall back from this. They got pushed out of Kharkiv, and then out of the area around Izium, then out of Kherson. So now Russia is down to just this strip right here, and they are about to lose that. The counteroffensive will be starting next month. I'm not sure why everyone was. I'm kind of surprised people were actually believing this month. It was never going to be this month. It was always going to be next month. Uh, Probably the second half of next month because they need some time to let the mud dry first. And so there's a few options. I'm not going to like say definitively which route is going to be taken, but the way it's probably going to go is either go through this area, which is the area where Russia has been least able to actually like fortify anything. Not that their fortifications have actually worked in the past, but hey, I'll pretend to give credit at least. So likely one of the routes would be punch through here and sort of make it look like you're going towards Mariupol. I mean, that they would kind of believe that since that's like a symbolic city after everything that happened. However, don't go to Mariupol, swing west, and basically just, roll southwest behind their defense lines. And since we've seen in the past with each counteroffensive, Russia does not do multi layered defense, they just have the one defense line. And behind that is usually empty nothing. And so uh, start funneling in there and rolling southwest. And once you have a force behind your lines just rolling behind you, you have no choice but to collapse. And so, in that, if that angle is chosen, they would have to collapse down to just the eastern Kherson region, which they would then end up just immediately willingly pulling back to Crimea, anyways, because at that point they're in a sandwich position, and literally anything in there is now in HIMARS range or in long range artillery range, also, and decent portions of Crimea at that point would already be in HIMARS range. So withdrawing from there would not like would not be like a putting Crimea in HIMARS range thing because it already would be if they were forced to collapse to just the eastern Kherson area. Because once Ukraine can get there, then pretty much all of Crimea is already in HIMARS range. So they would just cut the loss and fall back instead of being spread sandwiched like that. Or there is the Hug the River route, which which was given some kind of which was given some sort of credulity recently because they did do some probing attacks there, but I'm still banking on that just being a diversion to get Russia to focus some strength in that area. But I could be wrong, and they could decide to punch through there instead. And then uh, there's also the river crossing thing, which I highly doubt, although Ukraine has gotten forces across the river now and has been doing some stuff. But I'm reasonably confident that is just sort of a stick poking diversion again, just like the probing attacks in the Zaporizhia area. I'm I'm not like heavily convinced, but I'm like confident enough. Like I'd say it's going to be more avoid this heavy area and then, but instead like punch through here and do a hook circle. So that is coming next month sometime, and this whole front is going to collapse and cave into Crimea, and then they're just going to start bombarding everything. And once, since to Russia, this is Russia in Russia's eyes. Once that starts happening and the sort of grand failure of the empire starts to set in mentally, that's going to begin to trigger the interior collapse. But that, all in all, is going to take place over the course of the 2020s. And further, if Ukraine actually decides to, uh, and for all intents and purposes, I heavily expect they're basically just going to ignore the whole Donbass region and effectively just leave it, especially since they've gotten Russia to like throw so much force and effort into trying into like just small now basically pointless cities like Bakhmut. They're effectively going to, I would heavily suspect, just ignore that and not even really try to retake it, and just leave it as a monument of Russian meat waves. Uh, the real thing in the end is going to be Crimea, because first, just breaching the safety of Crimea will be a massive psychological blow, and then actually like entering Crimea will be a death blow. Now, going into Crimea itself, that I would not really expect even an attempt of until next year. As for whether they're going to do it or not, I'm taking them at their word. They've gone for everything that they've said they're going to go for. So they say they're going to keep going into Crimea, then they're going to keep going into Crimea. However, there is a vague chance that they might not actually have to, depending on how the internal fallouts of the sort of the frontline collapse down here, the land bridge to Crimea being cut and caved. That will basically be the final portion of cementing this as a grand military failure. So depending on how the internal fallout of that goes, they might not actually have to retake Crimea by force, depending on how things go internally back in Moscow. However, likely more so than not, likely yes, but that's not going to happen until next year. This whole thing here collapsing is what's coming very soon, or at least the start of it will begin next month, and this will take place over the course of the summer. Donbass basically going to be ignored for the most part, because that's not even if they like even if they like say went into Donbass and we took all Donbass at the same time as collapsing this whole front here, that still wouldn't really have any like effect back at home in terms of on Russia. So it's almost certainly going to be just focus all effort on collapsing this, and then start hitting Crimea with HIMARS artillery and everything available. Shatter the safety image and thus start the imperial crumbling, and then finalize it next year if necessary by actually punching into Crimea. Uh, I wouldn't. I wouldn't call that sensible. Liquid fuel, regular liquid fuel, is the best thing to use. Like it's the most optimal in every way. Something that you have to keep super cooled to be in liquid form is not a good thing. That one that requires keeping it either super cooled or heavily pressurized, which is really dangerous. That's like the same thing as everyone like trying to push hydrogen cars. So no, LNG/CNG cars, no. Uh, regular liquid fuel is the way. Uh, Oil will not be going away as soon as people would think. And also, biofuel is a thing. It is an actual thing that we can make, and can make at actually like really decent energy yields. Not the not like the corn to ethanol nonsense that like we do in the US, but stuff like down in Brazil, sugarcane to ethanol is really good. And then also what's the other one? What's the other one? I forgot what to butanol, but there is a route of something to butanol. I forget the plant. I forget the plant specifically, that has a decent yield, like the same as the sugarcane to ethanol stuff. And then there's like biodiesel from canola, which is actually really good. And the the yield of algae to jet fuel is really good. There's just a bit of an issue with like mass scaling of it. Uh, but otherwise the actual like energy yield of it is really good. The the way like the situation with that is literally just price, because stuff can be like easy and or simple but still cost a lot. So like for most of the biofuel stuff, biodiesel is the cheapest, especially if you do it from if you make it from canola. It has a relatively high yield in terms of energy in, energy out, and it costs relatively $3.50 a gallon. And biogasoline slash also biobutanol, whichever one for regular cars you would choose, is about $6 or $6.50 a gallon. And then biojet fuel is the most expensive, about $8 a gallon. So the thing that has made it like not happen is literally price. Because up until this point, obviously uh, up until the late 2000s, you know, fuel was for the most part like every kind of fuel, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel was for the most part, uh, you know, for the longest time under $1 per gallon, and then between $1 and $2 per gallon. And then even since the first oil peak, it's still been between $2 and $4 a gallon. And like I said, the cheapest biofuel is biodiesel, which is about 350. And so to start tipping in to that, looking generous, would require diesel fuel in that particular example constantly being above a 350, with regards to diesel fuel made from petroleum. However, said high prices that those biofuels cost are where regular actual fuel is going to be heading, because of various reasons, like what we've been going over for this whole stream, or rather for the like first or the half of this stream. Blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, I forgot. They went full nationalization with their with the mines and stuff. Yeah, that's not really intelligent. That was really not a wise move. Like Mexico finally just started like further denationalizing, unnationalizing its oil assets and its oil industry. And so now, over the last several years, that's what's allowed several players like Shell and I think I think Hess. I think it's Shell and Hess who've been doing a lot of offshore stuff there, and have actually been bringing a lot of deep water stuff online enough to like stall Mexico's decline to where it's they've been holding off at 1.7 million barrels per day for the last several years or so. Uh, so oil industry, not mining industry, but Chile. Thanks for reminding me. I totally forgot that they're now basically nationalizing their mining industry. So that's not going to go over well in terms of their amount outputs, at least long term into the future. Stuff will stay relatively all right for the like immediate next few years, but long term, that's not good. Uh, for for the moment, I believe for the moment, I believe they nationalized all the lithium related stuff, and they want to nationalize the copper portion, but they haven't like actually signed off on the decision yet. They did do the lithium though. So they didn't do the entire thing in one go. They're apparently doing it metal by metal, I guess, which is kind of weird because a lot of like the surprise fact for maybe some people, but there aren't really any specific like one metal only mines in the world except for a few things like uranium. In reality, like a mine like Chile's large copper mines also outputs huge amounts of other things alongside them, like molybdenum and bits of silver as well. So lithium is by itself though because that's coming from salt brines. But the way they were phrasing it in Santiago was as if they're like going to go metal by metal, which is again is kind of weird because at one pit at like each individual mine. Uh, sorry, I'm getting congested. At each individual mine, there'll be like copper and molybdenum coming out and silver and stuff. So that's like okay, so you specifically want everything related to the copper from each copper mine nationalized, but not the molybdenum or the silver. So for the industry portion of that, does like our mining equipment suddenly belong to your government when it's touching copper, but not when it's touching silver and molybdenum? Is that how this is kind of just like giving you insights into the fact that like the people actually making these decisions down in parliament have like no idea what they're talking about and no idea how anything works. But that tends to be like the case almost everywhere. Yes. Basically, before 2040, for the most part, it's going to level off likely somewhere between 120 and 130 trillion for a total global GDP uh, by or uh, by or around 2040 or so. Like it's crossing up over 100 this year, probably to like 101 or 102. But yeah, global GDP is going to level off probably between 120 and 130 by or around 2040. And within that, after that, individual countries will like still be will still be growing on their own. Others will be massively contracting. Others will be sort of contracting, and some others will be like staying flat. like Japan has been for the last 40 years. They've been relatively steadily, like even with declines on a lot of stuff, they've relatively held 5 trillion GPD steady. But there's for various reasons. I actually did I did a specific like more condensed video on that. If you want to see, it was a little ways back. I'm not sure how far back. How far back was it? I think it was somewhere in last year. There it is. I recognize that thumbnail. Oh no, sorry, it's this one. Yeah, economic growth will end before 2040 is the video. 32,000 views. Man, weren't those the days? Ugh, those were that was back in like the awesome days last summer where I was getting like $600 a month in ad revenue. That's not the case anymore now, is it? Uh, I mean, some will, others won't. Do remember a lot of stock price isn't entirely tied to reality, because it goes up and down based on people throwing money in or pulling money out, which people like general people investors are making those decisions most often on hype or on dare, or we'll call it anti-hype. So that's a lot of that is not really like directly one for one being tied to like actual market or supply and demand reality. At some point, someone made the brilliant decision to tie market valuations to uh, generic windblown human whims, which was really really ill advised. Uh, I mean, we kind of did the whole peak oil thing with the current situation already. Stream's been going for a while. In terms of like, if you mean each individual year, Canada, Canada, like this year is adding about 200,000. Next year, about 150, 150 the year after that. Uh, by gradual additions from steam lifting in the tar sands, along with some offshore stuff coming online off of Newfoundland. And then after that, further stuff will probably happen, but I can't like see that until it happens. So after that, after like this boost here, uh, for from like further offshore stuff that's going to take a few years to work up, it's going to slow down to like 50 plus 50K a year. Once everything's down to basically just being further steam lifting stuff in Alberta, and then eventually background decline stuff will level it out in the like mid 2030s or so, and uh, eventually, again, if nothing new happens, which given size and scale of territory and how much stuff is untouched, new stuff almost certainly will happen for Canada. But if nothing new happened, or nothing new was found anywhere or anything, then eventually the declines elsewhere would start offsetting the constant steam lifting additions. So eventually, once you get like the later mid 2030s, it would start seeing a decline of like 50K per year. But yeah, so over the coming dozen years or so, this is the relative curve for global production for the portions, like I said, that can be completely foreseen, not including the wild cards here who could suddenly re-add their production, or others like Libya could fall off the face of the earth at the drop of a dime if they suddenly erupt into civil war again. So discounting the unpredictables over there, this is the otherwise normal country's oil production play out here. So heading up to around later mid 20 later mid 2020s, like 2026, hitting kind of a high point and then going into a jaggedy plateau there up until turning into the early 2030s, we hit an actual start of the decline. And then right after here, like right after this, is where it starts getting steep. However, I didn't go further than that because, for one, I'm lazy, and two, that starts getting into like also some really unpredictable stuff because with the further exploration and development everywhere that will happen because of the massive price surges, I can't like actually foresee what may or may not be found. Let me see what else. Did I miss anything in particular? Water problems, blah blah blah. No further specification. G. Nationalization, economic growth. Yeah, okay, nothing new as far as I see, and I guess that's about it then for this haphazardly unorganized stream. Oh man, I forgot how far down I took that list. All right, so that's probably gonna be it, unless anything else comes up in like the next few seconds, other than Josh dabbing, apparently. Oh, you did miss a ban, uh, Taman. You weren't here for the first ever ban by request. Actually, someone couldn't handle not having their every comment responded to. So, and as usual, it's probably going to turn out that that guy was one of my patrons on Patreon because that seems to be a consistent thing recently. I was up to at one point. I was up to at one point. I forget how many patrons, but I was up to like $65 a month. Now I'm back down to like 40 because my patrons keep like leaving my Patreon because I banned them on YouTube. Because the rules are the same for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're giving me money or not. But there seems to be some complete like pattern here of everyone who comes onto my Patreon then immediately like starts doing stuff that makes me ban them, or in this case, asks to get banned. Although I don't know if that guy was actually on my Patreon or not. But just given the previous pattern, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out he was. So I don't know if people were actually like I don't know if people were actually like contributing to my Patreon, like hoping that it was a get out of jail free card or something. Like I'm giving you money, therefore I can like say racist stuff in your comment section or whatever. But just in case anybody was wondering, no, that's not how it works. Uh yeah. Uh Retirement is gonna keep getting pushed up. Uh I'm not what each individual country is different. Like not everybody has 65. I think 65 is like the most common number though. But like France was like way lower than a lot of other countries. So them pushing from 62 up to 64 was like more them normalizing towards being like everybody else. But yeah, that retirement age like being pushed up is a thing that is going to keep happening. Although uh Well, France is more protesty than like anybody else, so I doubt other countries doing it will get the same like 3 million people burning the streets down reaction that France got. But it's not going to get a happy reaction from everybody. And I feel like I'm forgetting something that I don't remember what I forgot. So me realizing that I forgot something is kind of useless in that regard. But all right, that's going to be it for this one. So I will see you guys around next time. If you got here late, then the stream recording, the video is immediately going to be visible in the live tab on the channel, anyways. But thanks for everybody who showed up, and whether there's another one on Thursday or not, I don't know. But one way or another, there'll be another one on Tuesday, like usual. But thanks everybody, and I will see you around next time.